Welcome to In the Garden with Laura. This is a new series designed to help you know how to create the garden of your dreams using native plants. And we want to give you the tips and the information so that you can create the garden of your dreams. Welcome to In the Garden with Laura, a show designed to help you plan gardens and plant your gardens and learn about native plants and how to use them in your garden. One of the things that's really essential to know about when you're planting a garden is to know about soil. And there are just thousands of combinations of soil or soil selections, as they're technically called, in the US. And there are hundreds of types in Maryland. After that, for me, it just gets really muddy. So I've invited a soil expert, Terry Heinard, to join us. She worked with the United States Department of Agriculture as a soil conservationist for a number of years in many different areas of Maryland on the state, local, and federal level, a number of different, on the Eastern Shore, Anne Arundel County, all in between. So, Terry, can you just enlighten us about soil?
I can tell you some things about it. It's a very broad subject, so we will touch on the basics of what you need to know. The first question is, what is soil? And it's actually the mineral component on the surface of the earth that also has organics, water, and air. And it's the structure that holds the plants in place, and it's the source of nutrients that the plants take the nutrients up through their roots so that the plants can grow.
So when you say organics, is that like dead animal matter, or, I mean, is organic as opposed to inorganic? What?
Well, the inorganic part is the minerals or the decomposed rocks. The organic is from living plants and animals that have either died and are decaying, or their waste products. Either their biological waste products, or when insects shed their skins, they decompose also.
Terrific. So why is soil so important when you go out to do a garden?
Well, to begin with, you need something to put the plant into. And soil is the medium that plants live in and have always lived in. It will give a place for the roots to grab hold and actually allow the plant to support itself and grow up. It's also a reservoir of water. It provides air and nutrients. So the plant utilizes all these things to grow.
How do I know what type of soil is in my garden?
Well, there's a couple of different ways that you can look at soil. You can look at it from the structure or the texture, or is it wet, or is it dry? The structure is it massive, like a solid clay pot, or is it crumbly, like cornbread, or is it something in between? The texture is it sandy, is it silty, or is it clay? There are places where you have pure sand, pure silt, and pure clay, but generally, and the overwhelming conditions are they're combined, and they've been combining for tens of thousands, and in some cases hundreds of thousands of years. The organic material also plays a part on how the soils are formed and the mineral components decompose.
So you'd say, like on the Eastern Shore, just to give a clear thing, that's sandy soil for the most part.
Yes.
Okay.
Now in Carroll County, our soils are derived from eroded mountains, the mountains that are found in Frederick County and western Carroll County. They used to be quite high, but they're very old, and so they've eroded, and the mineral components have washed downhill. On the Eastern Shore, it originally was under the ocean, and most of those are old ocean deposits. It also has a lot of silt, which is windblown from when the glaciers were melting up in New York, and the wind actually blew the silts to the Eastern Shore and parts of southern Maryland. So if in Maryland we have eroded old mountains, If you live in Hawaii, you have eroded lava. If you live in Florida, it's mostly sand. So it depends on where you live, the old geology, which influences the mineral component that it erodes away and interacts with water, the climate, and the organic material, plants and animals, to become soil.
So when you're looking at soil, if you're trying to plant something that is not native to this area, then you're probably going to have to fuss a lot with the soil to make the plant happy.
That's true. Even if you plant a native plant, you have to be careful. So if you have a plant that likes wet conditions and your ground is dry, that probably won't work. Or if you have a plant that likes hot, sunny conditions and you have wet shade, that probably won't work either.
Right.
So you have to take what you have. You can do some modification, but unless you're a multimillionaire, you really can't change the entire condition of your property.
Now, people will often curse this clay soil that we have in Carroll County, Maryland. There is another Carroll County in the country, so we want to make sure that people know we're in Maryland. But they'll just say, oh, it's so hard to dig up. But clay soil actually has some real benefits, doesn't it?
Yes. You have clay soil, sandy soil, and silty soil. And if you combine all of them in different combinations, you end up with what's called loam, which is the ideal. Now, the clay has a benefit in that the clay particles are extremely small, and they're also very chemically active. So you can have nutrients being held onto your clay particles and released from the clay particles when the plants need it. Sand is pretty much inert. It doesn't hold nutrients, and it also won't hold water. Silt is kind of in between. So the clay soil has some very good benefits. It is, at least in my yard, very shallow and rocky. But you can make amendments and you can make improvements to the soil so that the plants that you want to grow will prosper.
Wonderful. So perhaps the first step would be to do a soil test. Many people talk about doing a soil test so you know what you have.
That's correct.
And maybe you can, I've got a soil test here, maybe you can talk to me a little bit about that test. It has a pH, 2 areas. One is the side yard and the other is the front yard. And in the, that's a lawn. Okay. In the front yard, it has a pH of 7. And it talks about pH, phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, calcium. It's got so much information you begin to almost spin. Mm-hmm. What does a pH tell you? Why is pH important?
pH is the relative acidity of the soil, and that will give you an indication of the availability of nutrients to be released or held on the soil particles. If the pH is extremely low, nutrients that you need can be held there. If the pH is extremely high, that can also happen. So you want kind of a middle ground, and 6.8 is a very good pH for vegetable gardens and many flower beds. But if you want to grow something like blueberries or the blue hydrangeas, you want more acidic. Maryland will have naturally an acidic soil. For tens of hundreds of thousands of years, we had oak forests. And when the oak trees fall and they decompose, the acids in the oak leaves leach into the soil and make the soils naturally acid. So when people talk about pH and modifying the pH of their soil, they generally apply lime, which will adjust the pH to a level that you may want for the garden that you plan to grow.
And azaleas, rhododendrons, pine trees all like acidic soil.
They do like acidic soil, and in many cases, those are native plants, and they've adapted and they have thrived in Maryland under the acid soil conditions.
Right, so around maybe 6 or so for those?
6 point, yes.
Okay. Now, then I have in my side garden, I have a pH of 4.3, and that's because it had pine trees all in it. Are there any other numbers in this that you should really pay attention to when considering your soil?
Right, when you take a soil sample, you take random samples and then you send it off to a soil test lab, and they do an analysis of the primary nutrients that your plants need to grow. And that would be potassium and phosphorus. They test that. You will also get a report on other things like magnesium and calcium, and sometimes boron or lead. Plants need nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus to grow. So your soil test result will tell you what is now in your soil, what is the nutrient level in your soil currently. It won't tell you the current level of nitrogen. Nitrogen is a gas, and it moves around a lot, so it's extremely hard to test. Phosphorus and potassium are mineral components, and they're much easier to test. So when you send your soil sample in, you'll get a report back telling you what your current levels are of nutrition in your soil. And when you send your soil sample in, you tell them what you want to grow. Do you want to grow tomatoes, or do you want to grow rhododendrons? And they will give you a recommendation for the amount of fertilizer, pounds per 1,000 square feet, and the amount of lime or another soil amendment that may adjust your soil pH depending on what you want to grow.
So if you have questions, once you get this soil survey back and you just go, you get sort of like a deer in headlights and you don't know what to do, you can also go to your extension service, either the Carroll County, Maryland Extension Service, or your extension service in any state of the country, and ask them for help interpreting this and sort of navigating how to get through this.
That's correct, but usually, at least in all of them that I have seen, you will see a chart showing you what the current nutrients are in the soil, but then there'll be data at the bottom of the sheet with recommendations of the amount and timing of fertilizer and or lime that you had. And that's always on there, depending on the plants that you told them you wanted to grow.
Okay, so once you get the soil survey, this is going to give you a roadmap of what to do to grow what you want to grow. So you can do that ahead of planting your garden. You can take that soil sample and then find out that, oh, if I want to have a garden full of oak leaf hydrangeas, a lovely native hydrangea plant, this is what I need to do. Or if I want to have some lawn in my yard, then this is what I need to do to get it working better.
Correct.
Okay.
Now this just tells you about this focuses on the mineral components. It will also give you some indication of the percentage of organic matter in your soil. Now you have to remember that soil is made up of a mineral component, an organic component, oxygen, well, air, atmospheric air, and water. So it will give you some idea of the amount of organic material in your soil. Maryland soils are not typically very high in organic material. A peat bog is extremely high in organic material because it's just decomposing organics. So one of the ways that you can improve your existing soils is to add organic material. And this can be in the form of compost, well-rotted manures, or mulches, which can be straw or leaves, some kind of organic material that will decompose. The decomposition is performed by microorganisms that live in the soil, and there's tens of millions of them in the soil, and they also contribute to the organic material in the soil.
When's the best time to improve your soil?
If you have a brand new place and you haven't done anything, or if you have a new bed that you're going to start in the spring, if you can start working on it in the fall, that's the best. If at all possible, if you could do some digging or some loosening up of the soil, add some organic materials. If you get your soil test done, and if you have time, you can put some, it needs lime, you can add that. So that could be done in the fall, and then the microorganisms can work. The soil particles will break down a little bit more. If you have clumps, they'll break down a little bit more as they weather through the winter. And then in the spring, which is always a busy time, a lot of that's already been done.
Any other tips for us today?
Do not work your soil when it's wet. One of the important things to remember is that there are channels in the soil created by worms and bugs and decomposed roots. That lets atmosphere into the soil. It also lets water into the soil. If you walk or work your soil when it's wet, you compress it, and that makes it extremely hard for plant roots or other living creatures like worms to travel through the soil.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you coming today.
No problem.
Thank you for coming to In the Garden with Laura. We also have a website of the same name, and we look forward to seeing you the next time.